Let's begin. Okay, so tonight we're talking about the alchemy. Finally. So, the alchemy is one of three of the most important things in Gnosis. We have the three factors, yeah? Birth, death, sacrifice. Well, technically Samael changed it to death, birth, and sacrifice, putting them into a new order so that people would work on the ego instead of being slack. But originally he always had birth as the number one, which is the alchemy, the birth of the interior bodies, the birth of the Christ, the birth of the soul. And, I mean, for us Western people, I would say it's that way. Yeah, we're a little more inclined to look at our psychology in a way, because we're sort of more intellectual as a basis. But the alchemy is completely the most important thing for us, and therefore the most important thing in Gnosis for us. So this is the first of two classes. Next week is the practical application of the alchemy. We're going to go into the, as they say, the nitty-gritty. You know what I mean? But this week, I want to talk about transmutation. Talk about the movement of the energy, about sexuality, about the energies. This is more of this topic centers on what we call the Arche, which is a lecture Samael gave. The Arche, which is a Greek word, means the key of perpetual motion. It's the first principle. It's that from which Plato says is from which all knowledge derives. But no one ever really knew what it was. People sort of came up with like ideas about it. They had ideas about what the Arche is, but no one really knows, yeah? I'm sure if you look up philosophy, etc., people are going to have their own ideas about what the Arche is. But for us, the Arche is the sexual energy. It's the sexual substance. It is but to go one step further, it's actually the transmuted sexual substance. The transmuted creative sexual substance is the Arche, meaning the key of all things, the key of perpetual motion. Do you understand how important that is? You know, there are still people to this day trying to create perpetual motion machines. Yeah, there are people trying to create engines that never stop. It doesn't work that way. Nothing works. I remember, even if you see the most fantastic, machines that constantly move, like, people make those ones with little ball bearings that keep turning around. Even eventually friction wears them down. Even I've seen ones done with liquid, etc. They eventually they fall apart. So the true perpetual motion is the power of the sexual energy itself. Yeah, it's the force of sexual energy. The only thing that can create something that actually continues on is the sexual energy. It is by far the most potent and powerful substance on the entire planet. Everything revolves around it. Think about it. What movie do you watch without a love interest? You know what I mean? No one's interested in the movie without the love interest. You know what I mean? What was that movie? Is it Master and Commander? Is that the one where it's just like a whole bunch of blokes on a ship? Do you know what? It's just like, oh yeah, it's a whole bunch of men on a ship. What's going on, guys? Not much, And yeah, you got to put a love interest in. Even the Disney films have it. You have to have it, yeah? The prince, the princess, the movement of the human soul, yeah? Everything revolves around sex. This is why people go to parties, all these sorts of things, yeah? A family is a sexual unity. It is the unity of a man, the woman, then having a progeny, having an offspring, and then continuing, even on the most mundane level, continuing the race, yeah? So it's sort of the hub of the wheel, if you understand what I mean. All human activity moves around it. Everything, even advertising. I was looking somebody up. Somebody wants to come see me, and I looked them up because I figured they have a name for themselves. And I looked up their name online, and they have a YouTube channel and all these sorts of things, and they run lots of businesses. But I thought it was quite funny, like, the lady's giving some advice about mindfulness, but the thumbnail for the video is just a shot right here. It's just right here. She's talking about mindfulness, but the thumbnail just shows this, the space between her breasts. And I thought, I'm sure that's a very watched video. You click on it, of course, thousands and thousands of views, because people are very interested in that kind of mindfulness. You know what I mean? It's a pity. I should get like a nice fancy woman to give all the lectures or something. Maybe we'll get more views, But anyway, all this sort of thing, right? This has to do with the fact that really everything revolves around the movement of that sexual energy. Kingdom rise, kingdom fall, everything. It's fantastic. Now, so this force, this sexual principle, this perpetual movement, this power that we have inside of ourselves, yeah, this is the sexual energy, the sexual substance. But as I said, it's not really the Arche, it's not really this first principle or the root of all knowledge unless it's transmuted, which we'll get to in this lecture. So first we have to talk about the use of the sexual energy. We have to talk about sexuality itself to understand a little more deeply about what we're actually going into, what we're talking about here. Because we're not just, next week we're going to talk about the practice itself, the practice of alchemy, and the movement of the energy in that practice itself. But first, let's go into sexuality. So, there are 3 types of sexuality. There's infra-sexuality, normal sexuality, and super-sexuality. Yeah? Normal sexuality I mentioned first. Normal sexuality is just, it's different to what we would call it nowadays. See, the reality of the way things are now in our society is that the word normal doesn't really describe what they call grey tantra or normal sexuality anymore. Because normal sexuality is just having sex in order to have children. That's it. So normal sexuality is actually the relationship just for the family. Really. And this was a lot more common in your age and era of, of peasants and peasantry. You know, when there was no sort of special, fantastic things that you could use to stop yourself from having a baby. There was none of these sorts of things. And so people would occasionally, they would come together and join sexually to have children, and other times they would just not lose their sexual fluids, but maybe, I guess you could say, play around a bit, yeah? Enjoy each other's company, but not to actually, but it wasn't, you know what I mean? They wouldn't lose it if they weren't having children. They'd lose it if they were having children, yeah? Or maybe lose it if she's pregnant, perhaps, you know? But at the same time, this was normal. So losing the sexual energy, this creative substance occasionally, and then, but more for the process of having children, and mostly not just using it for its own sensation. Now, infra-sexuality is much more common. This is the degenerative use of that sexual fluid, right? This is that fluid that can, as I said, this fantastic fluid, creative substance. And infra-sexuality is to always lose this substance, yeah? To be using it only for its sensation, okay? So to talk about it, we have to break it up into 2 parts. There are 2 parts of infra-sexuality. One is Nahima, the other one Lilith. If you know from the Bible, these are the wives of Adam, yeah? The other wives of Adam, not Eve. She's all right. You know what I mean? So you have Lilith and Nahima. Now, Nahima is the lesser of the 2, yeah? Nahima is the use of the sexual energy for sensuality, for pleasure only. So in here, we have the Casanovas. Casanova, do you guys know who Casanova was? Yeah? Casanova was the man who's famous for having many, many, many sexual escapades. And to be honest with you, that's kind of what most people are like nowadays until they're like 30. It's true. I go to the share houses now and everyone's got their own separate room with their double bed for just when they want to bring someone in on the weekend. You know what I mean? But no one's really settling down. They're not thinking about having a family. They're just, you know, having a good time playing. So it's about the sensuality. It's about the feeling, you know what I mean? And that's what you're doing. And I go in, remember it's kind of tricky. I go into people's rooms all the time because I'm a handyman and I repair things in your rooms that are broken, you know? But I go into people's rooms all the time and I see this stuff and it's all the sensuality. You know, we have special candles, we have the little, incenses and everything, but it's all about the pleasure of the senses. You know, it's not about love in those moments, yeah? It's just about the feeling. You don't care if you're never going to see them. You know, all of the songs, you know, like the music is about this now. You know what I mean? Oh, come on, baby, if it's just for one night, oh, I'll just be with you for one night, and then I'm going in the morning, you know. And this is quite, you know, when you sort of see it on its own, people go, oh, it's not so bad, but it is. It's just sensuality. I'm just living for my senses, you know. And what happens to a lot of these people in the long run is they end up alone. You know what I mean? We enjoy this time from when we're perhaps 18, 16 until we're whatever, 32, 33, and then the rest of the life is often lived alone because we spent all this time just mucking around, playing with the sexual energy. So this is the sensuality of infra-sexuality, yeah? Now, the next level down from that is what Samael refers to as the Don Juan, yeah? Now, the Don Juan is the conqueror. And okay, this is just a name. Of course, this can be men and women. In fact, that was exactly what I was just describing before. So the Dom one is the conqueror. So here, this is one sexuality is about conquering. So I'm not interested in, again, I'm not interested in having a relationship. I'm not interested in settling down and having a family. I'm just looking to have a conquest there. This man wants to be with as many women as he can. This woman wants to be with as many men as she can. And this again is a misuse of that sexual energy. See, because what this eventually leads to, the Dom Juan ego, because it's egotistical, right? Casanova eventually can lead to Dom Juan, but Dom Juan will eventually lead to Lilith. Because what will happen is over time, living this way, very often the person will start to hate sex. That's actually what happens. Because as we'll go into a little bit more in next week's when we talk about the sort of magnetism in the actual sexual act itself, yeah? But when we fornicate, when we have the sexual spasm, the orgasm, yeah, instead of love, what often happens is then we have a short circuit. So we build up all this energy and then we short circuit and then suddenly we sort of blast apart. And this, in the beginning, people can conquer this by, as in lots more sensuality in the senses. But over time, eventually the person actually, they get more and more rejecting of that person, more and more rejecting of being with them. And you see this in the relationship. This is why you see now divorce is just rampant. It's one of the most common things, yeah? Divorce, separations, it's rare, very rare now to see people staying together for a whole lifetime. It's actually extremely hard. And again, because of the fact that we're always losing that sexual fluid. So the Dom Juan, as I said, he conquers. Yeah, he just sees it as a conquest, but really, he doesn't really care about that other person. They're just another number, another notch. It's the same thing with the woman who feels that way. It's just another number, another notch. Yeah, I conquer that particular person. I want to be with that man or something. He's not interested. Well, I'll make him interested. Yeah, and so you're beginning to play a dangerous game with your sexuality, because what you're starting to, rather than your sexuality moving towards love and spirituality, because this is what should happen, is sexuality is something that should be linked with spirituality, yeah, naturally. What actually happens to us is we actually start to then, we start to push away from that. And it becomes, so as I said, in here, we're not interested in any sort of spirituality, it's just about the senses, but now it's getting even further away, yeah? And so what eventually happens to the Dom Juan is they move into Lilith, and Lilith is the hatred of sex, yeah? Lilith is actually the hatred of sexuality. This is what happens. And we can see this in a couple of different ways. The obvious one is the celibate, yeah? The celibate person, the celibate man, the celibate woman, and this is different to the chaste, yeah? We'll talk about scientific chastity when we get down here to super-sexuality. But when we're talking about when we're talking about chastity is to transmute. The energy moves. But celibacy, like a person can be celibate, meaning that they're not having any sexual connection. A person can be having no sexual connection, not with another person, but moving that energy and transmuting it through single breathing exercises and working with it and still looking for a partner. Or maybe in their age, they're not looking for a partner anymore, but still moving the energy inside. A celibate person is a person who's actually allowed the hatred of sexuality to enter into them. And we see this a lot, yeah? Remember the old, the old nuns at school? Snapping the ruler on the back palms. Whoosh. You kids are young, you didn't know about it, you know what I mean? We had a lady like that in my school. She was like the last of an era, so they let her do it. Like she was like the last, because I was maybe 9 or 10 or something, and that's 16 years ago. Oh, sorry, 26 years ago. And anyway, I remember there was this one lady at school who still like gave people the ruler. You know what I mean? I remember I asked someone about my and they said, she's like the last one. She's retiring in a year. We don't really want to. We're just going to let it go. She wasn't too hard. She was just like a little bit of a snap here and there. You know what I mean? But, the old nuns like this, rather than having this feeling for the Mother Mary and the Christ and His beauty, they become hardened. and angry, and they actually hate sex. They hate seeing other people together. It makes them upset, and they actually get really angry. And I see, as an example, now remember, I'm not talking about all nuns. I'm just talking about people who get into this way, who become Lilithian in their sexuality. So they actually start to hate sexuality, and remember, they hate sex itself, but they also hate all sexuality. So I remember it happened. Ruby and I, just before we got married, we went on this trip. We kind of had our honeymoon before our wedding. It's complicated. We were poor, and there was a big international retreat like 3 weeks before our wedding. So we took our honeymoon before our wedding, even though we weren't really. It was weird. We went to Ireland. It was lovely. But at the same time, anyway, I was sick the entire time, whatever. But I remember when we went on this plane, we were flying with, I can't remember, not Emirates, the other one, Qatar. And we got sat next to this nun, and she sat like in the aisle, so we couldn't get out. She was very, very like weighty. She was large and very solid. She was, what did I say? She was built like a brick shit house. Shouldn't say that. She's just a solid, intense woman, but she couldn't speak our language. And I don't know. I don't know where she was from, but she was a nun. But like, she obviously noticed very quickly that Ruby and I weren't married. But we were, we're Western, so we're holding hands and chatting. We kiss and chatting and sort of stuff. And she started intervening with us, and she started having a go at us, like, you don't touch each other, don't do anything at all with each other while I'm married. And the lady had to come and translate for us, and she said, look, she's a nun, so please don't hold hands or touch or kiss while she's there. And I actually got up. I had to get up out of the aisle and said, look, you can't do this to us. Like, we're about to get married, and you can't just tell us that you can't sit this lady next to us and then tell us that we can't do it. And it's really hard. She had like a wheelchair, so if you need to go to the toilet, like getting her out of there was just a nightmare. It was just so hard, you know what I mean? That was a really, really weird trip, It's funny because on the next flight, there was a homosexual air attendant who then kept hitting, and I'm not going to get it. Was a really, really, he was hitting on me, and Ruby thought it was hilarious, so she like encouraged it, and it was just like, it was full on, and it just kept going. It was just like, he's like, oh, what are you saying? Huffing about you, little Irishman or something. I can't remember. It was awkward. He called me a little leprechaun, and it was just kept giving me treats and stuff, and it was just, I was like, Ruby's like, oh, it was a mess. But yeah, this lady, she couldn't allow us to have any form of relationship because she hates sex. It makes her uncomfortable, makes her feel sick. She actually feels sick seeing a normal relationship, a man and a woman or a boy and a girl, makes her upset. At the school, the same thing. They always want they want the segregation. They want the boys in the boys' class and the girls in the girls' class. And if a boy like touches a girl's hand, they're beating the hand, trying to break the fingers. How dare you touch him? Because, oh, good God, how could they even feel each other? And all of that comes from inside her, not from outside, yeah? You could argue nowadays that people are really dirty, and okay, fair enough, people have become that way. But back then, no, most of these people are only just beginning to know. It's actually quite, it's quite normal in that sense when the kids are hitting that age and they're becoming teenagers to sort of look around and begin to notice each other and want to spend time together, want to walk around together, that sort of thing. It's normal, very, very normal. But these people, they start to hate it, And what's interesting is our society is becoming more and more full of hatred towards sex, that we're getting weird. We are getting weird. Do you know what I mean? Like in society now, like everyone, like for instance, like all of the movies and TV and stuff from the 70s and 60s and stuff had like just naked children. It wasn't a big deal. Do you know what I mean? Like you'd have a little naked. Like we watched this movie, The Secret of Rowan Inish. It was an Irish film, and it's got this little baby in a he's like got stolen by a selkie when he was a child, but it's so cute. It's like 3-year-old, like he just gets in his little what's it called? His little cradle, and he's like shooting around the water. It's quite funny, but he's just naked the whole film. You know what I mean? And what's interesting is if you inside yourself have nothing wrong with you, that doesn't bother you. Do you know what I mean? If you're used to, and I said, if inside myself, if my sexuality isn't bent, then It's like, oh, there's just some naked children. That's normal, because the children aren't like that. The children don't have, their sexuality doesn't activate in the child until 13, 14. It starts at 14 when they enter the period of Venus. So up until that point, they're usually, okay, once they're getting a bit older, you've got to be a bit more careful, of course, but it used to be quite normal, and so, but now it's interesting, we're sort of really careful. I'm not saying that we have to go. The reality is everyone now is becoming so degenerated in themselves that they can't handle that. And so we cover it all up. Oh gosh, you know what I mean? And now it's like, I don't even want my child's face on social media because it might be weird. It's like, no, you're weird. The weirdness is in you. Turn the phone around. Put it on selfie, not away, And this is the thing. So this is the hatred of sex. So I'm becoming bent. When I'm looking around and saying the whole world's full of pedophiles, that's usually because I'm actually allowing that into myself a little bit, and it scares me. I've been letting that in. And how do you let that in? By watching bloody CSI constantly and seeing horrible stories about this sort of stuff. You still let it in.
Or it's cultural.
Pardon?
Or it can be cultural.
What do you mean?
Well, obviously Juliana's Brazilian, and the first thing I noticed with her and was just like, that's an extremely over-sexualized culture.
Oh, yeah.
And, the things she described as normal, when you go to parties or to the nightclubs, he would be put in jail. And I thought she was exaggerating.
Yeah.
When I went to the first trip there, and I went out and she took me to a couple of clubs, I was like, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and then, I just noticed with female friends that I've got that are Brazilian that are here in Australia, they're all kind of essentially sexually traumatized by this consistent micro kind of sexual abuse that they experience from a very young age.
I know what you mean, yeah.
And same thing that just a lot of kids getting stolen from the beaches all the time.
Yeah.
So then, whenever I grew up around bush naked in Australia.
Yeah.
I get over there and a child runs 10 meters away and Juliana's having a panic attack.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why? But now I can understand.
Yeah, it's a degeneration of the culture. Yeah. The people.
It's full on.
Yeah. So, okay, I don't want to go too deep. So the point here is that then the same thing, this is exactly the same thing that causes homosexuality, transvestitism, sodomy, all these sorts of things are actually the hatred of sexuality.
You get built up.
Yeah. I don't want to go too deeply into it, but I have to mention it because it's part of the lecture. The reality is this is what happens. Yeah, the man starts to hate sexuality inside of himself, and then he eventually is repelled against women. They repulse him. He can't be around them any. He doesn't want to be with a woman at all. He becomes repulsed by her. You know what I mean? And I've seen this like massively. This may sound funny because I'm a Gnostic missionary, but I used to work at a trendy lesbian cafe. Yeah, I worked there for a whole year. And I'll tell you one thing. It's funny because everyone talks about all this sort of love and all this sort of stuff. Everything's fantastic. I worked there for ages. Many, many, many lesbians attending that cafe. One thing, have you ever noticed that gay men and gay women don't hang out? At all. At all. Gay men and gay women are not friends. At all. You see it in movies. Everyone goes, Pride Month. Everyone's all together. They'll get together for Pride Month, perhaps. But generally speaking, no. Yeah? Because they actually don't get along. And in the same way, there's actually a lot of cruelty in that. You see gay men around women, what do? They make fun of them. They're rude, extremely rude. Gay men are very rude to women. You know what I mean? The way they talk. All of the fashions in the world that the women have to wear, all of this stuff is made by men. Yeah? Hugo Boss, all these guys, they're all gay men. The whole lot of them. I know because my friend was a model in Milan and he met all these guys. And they said, if you give yourself over to those men, they'll make you a star. But you got to basically let them drug you and have their way with you, which is something I'm not going to talk about tonight. But all that sort of stuff. But what they're doing is actually really cruel. I remember reading an article once and it said, it goes, sorry ladies, mini skirts are in this winter. Sorry. Do you know what I mean? You're going to have to wear these tiny little clothes and it's freezing cold outside because a couple of gay guys in France have decided that's what you're going to wear now. Do you understand? That's a hatred of women inside. And it's exactly the same. Yeah, if you ever dealt with lesbian women, it's exactly the same. They hate men, just straight up. Yeah, they just really dislike men. You know, and this is the way it is. So what's happened is you've actually formed inside of yourself a repulsion. And a lot of the time it can be from trauma, of course. Yeah, it can be from a past life. A person can reach that point. It can be from allowing yourself to go too deep. You ever see those guys walking around who are like, they're like 50. They got 3 grown-up kids, but now they're dating a Thai guy. Hate to be their wife before that. Yeah, because what happened is he let his sexuality go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, yeah? Maybe he started pushing some things in the relationship. He wanted to go deeper, deeper, because what you do is you cross lines. When it comes to sexuality, you cross lines, yeah? There's lines. In the beginning, you have like a normal sort of relationship, and then you cross lines. You cross lines, you cross lines. And that's how you get to this sort of point inside of yourself, yeah? So, yes, some people are born that way, yes, because they did it in the past life. And they've twisted inside their little nature and they've become that way. Some people can become that way in this life because they push themselves to that level. Or it can be trauma, of course. It can be karma, where a person is pushed into that position, quite unfortunately, as a child. And so all of these things, but all of them come down to a hatred of sex. That's actually usually what happens too. You see in a lot of homosexual couples, once they get old, they don't want anything to do with it. They're actually usually just off. In fact, one of the largest things in lesbian couples is to be mostly asexual. Just 2 women living together because they just can't deal with men anymore. If you understand what I mean. That's also kind of what, I'll probably get defunded for that. I'm not even funded, but I get this taken down. But there's one thing I thought was pretty interesting. But have you ever noticed that every man and woman thinks the exact same thing about a lesbian woman? They just think you can't get yourself a man. That's what every woman ever thinks, and it's what every man thinks the same thing, you know? But in reality, as I said, there's all this happens. What really has happened inside is there becomes a hatred of sex. And that person actually is then full of repulsion. And then what they often do is they sort of go 2 ways. You see often the women, they sort of really fall into the hatred and become really hard and coarse in themselves, really brutal, and quite sort of, they become honestly quite dirty in the way that they are. They want to look dirty. They're cutting their hair off, wanting to look rough, you know, because they hate their own sex. They actually hate their own sexuality itself. They don't want to be a woman. That's what happens here with transvestitism. Transvestitism, I don't know how to say that. And to go, and the same thing happens with the gay men. They're afraid of showing what they're actually doing. They go the other way, and they go clean, ultra clean. You know, you go to a gay guy's house, it's like perfect. You know what I mean? Everything's perfectly clean. Everything's perfectly sprayed and cleaned. But then what do? They put the thing there, you know, that's like the dirtiest place you can put it. Do you know what I mean? I know it's not a nice thing to say, but it's true. And so they hate that about themselves. They hate it. It makes them upset inside. And so because of that hatred of sexuality, and that makes them like that. Do you know? And then they're trying to hide it because they're full of a lot of pain. They're trying to hide it, you know what I mean? They act like everything's fine with the women. No, we're fine, bitch. You know, because deep down, they're actually full of pain. We have to really actually pity a person in that situation, because that's a torture on the soul. Yeah, not to hate them, not to push them away, but to see that that's actually, it's really damaged inside that sexuality. And that also shows us now why someone can flip from this side to the other, and that's not actually a contradiction. You see that often the priest, yeah, who's the guy running, we hear about all the Catholic priests, you know what I mean, who's a celibate, and then suddenly he goes from being celibate to with another man, and you say, well, even worse, you know what I mean? How does that happen, right? You say, how does that happen? It's like the opposite. No, it's not. It's not. It's not the opposite. He's full of sexual pain, and then he just flips like that. And then the same way, they often flip again. Then go back to being a priest. Oh God, you know? And so what this does, this is the Lilithian sexuality, you know what I mean? And all of this online pornography, all this sort of thing, all of this illicit stuff, it takes us down a pathway that leads to there. That's where you keep crossing lines. You watch a worse video, and it takes you down a pathway. You know what I'm saying? It's trying to take you into that area, which is a shame, because that's actually how the Black Lodge works. It's all about crossing lines. Yeah.
Before you change it,
yes. Yes.
How did bisexual people be in this situation?
Well, it's the beginning of that. Do you know what I mean? It's like in the beginning, it's like you're sort of like you're starting to cross a line. Do you know what I mean? So you're sort of dipping. Like here, let's say that's the line. You're like, but one day, oh, And then that's it, you're gay. That's the reality. Do you know what I mean? My father used to drive, this is pretty heavy, but my father used to drive, he's a taxi driver, and for a long time. And he used to drive prostitutes home from in the morning, in the early morning, from their work, the brothel. And they always used to say the same thing. They said all the same thing. They'd say the money's really good for doing that. Really good money. Yeah. But they would say, he said he'd heard the girls say it lots of times. And even the guys. They're like, yeah, but be careful. They always say the same thing, be careful. He said he heard 3 people say the same thing. You do it too many times, you become one of them. You do it maybe 3, 4 times, that's it, you become one of them. And then you can't go back because you've now crossed that line. Do you understand what I mean? So it's about crossing lines, if you understand what I mean. Sexuality, in our modern society, infra-sexuality is all about crossing lines. We can start in a normal sexual relationship, but then we keep sort of pushing forwards. A little bit of violence, you know what I mean? A little bit of something, maybe I don't want to do.
Some people doesn't hate any of the gender.
Yes. Sorry?
It doesn't hate the people don't hate any gender.
Yeah.
Just like both.
Yeah.
Doesn't more hate.
I'm repeating the same thing. This hatred doesn't come out like as in I hate you, right? It slowly builds up inside. Do you know what I'm trying to say is we feel like we can't control. See, sexuality is something incredibly powerful, right? It is also something that is incredibly it manipulates your entire inner being. Do you understand what I mean? Like it's incredibly powerful, this force inside of you. And what I'm trying to say is if we start that way, we'll eventually end up. If you start there, you'll end up here. That's what's going to happen. Do you know what I mean? We play a little bit, but it's about crossing lines. I'm trying to say when you cross it, you say, "Oh, it's okay, I'm okay, it's okay," but eventually, you're going to end up in the other side. And it seems fine now, but trust me, once you've been like that for a while, what's actually going to happen is you're going to slowly feel a bit sick inside. I'm not saying you start hating people like that, but you feel repulsed. So slowly, I'm twisting my energy like that. I'm twisting, and then suddenly I can't have children unless I do some messy thing, some weird scientific procedure or something, you know what I mean? Because I've twisted that natural part of myself. So that's my answer. The bisexual means we're starting to cross a line, and I suggest stepping back, because otherwise we'll end up over that line. Do you know what I mean?
And it's not as you said, it's not necessarily expressing hatred towards.
No.
I've done mentor for a long time. I've seen men that have said they're gay, and they don't have hatred for women necessarily, or whatever else. They're quite operating quite beautiful people, but then slowly as they dive deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into themselves, they discovered a rage and a hatred and a pain that they didn't realise was connected to the reason they were gay. When they cleared that, they realised that pain was so deep and so unconscious that it was manifesting itself as that type of attraction, when really in the core of their being they wanted to clear it out and find a balance.
Yeah. You don't want to play with sexuality. You don't want to play with it because you don't come back. That's the danger. That's my warning.
It's actually funny, Nick. I saw that with us. So
Yeah.
we started out as a normal sexual couple. Right?
Yeah.
And so we found Gnosis, luckily. Otherwise, we would have ended up we were considering, swimming. We were considering, I guess, doing things with other couples. Because I actually had a repulsion to sex when I first came to Gnosis. It was pretty strongly there. I was repulsed by it. It's disgusting. It was actually repulsive to the fornication, I think, because when you find the alchemy, it's beautiful.
Yes.
But I saw that in
This is
action,
it.
crossing lines. We didn't end up crossing, I guess, the bisexual kind of line, but we were crossing, we were looking, I think I said, 50 Shades of Grey. That's where I was going. I was like, something's got to make this okay. Yeah. Not disgusting.
Yes. See, this is the interesting thing. The sexual energy itself, we don't realize until we're well over that line. Do you understand? You don't realize that you're playing, you don't realize. It's very interesting what you say. Inside yourself, we maybe feel a little bit, we maybe see it as I'm a little bit bored. I don't know, I'm a little bit curious. But once you cross those lines, once you get to a certain point, you can't come back. Do you know what I mean? And then you're stuck in no man's land.
It's also really normalized.
That's right.
It's seen as normal in the culture.
But it's not. It's not. What it does to you is it puts you somewhere you don't want to be. That's what I'm trying to say. That hatred, you'll feel it deep inside yourself, but you won't realize till much later on.
And I wouldn't say you can't come back. I would possibly
It'll
say
be extremely hard.
Yeah, but that's different to impossible. I think that's a good clarification.
But with homosexuality specifically, you actually twist the energy. So what happens is, right, naturally speaking, a man is attracted to a woman. It's very simple. It just happens that way, right? And it's been like that forever. But the problem is, right, if you twist it inside yourself, if you twist that nature inside yourself, you're then not attracted. And the only way to repair that is the alchemy, as I'm about to go into. So therefore, you would basically have to practice even though you don't want to. And that's going to be like, you're going to feel repulsed by the practice, which is actually your own problem deep down. But do you see the problem? Do you see how hard that is to come back from? You know what I mean? It's like trying to learn the piano with broken fingers. It's like it's going to be really hard. That's weird. Sorry? Really? No, not impossible, but very difficult. I've seen it very, very, very hard to come back. You got to be careful. You shouldn't play with sex, you know what I mean? Because it's something it's quite powerful. The problem is in our society now, that's what they teach. Play, investigate, see what you like. But in reality, what they're doing is cross lines, cross lines, cross lines. And then the person's, 45 or something, they're full of pain, racked with guilt, and they don't know why. And then they go back and they try to figure it out, and usually it just ends up going deeper in, and then that's it. Oh, I don't know, maybe I got to go to Thailand now and try something even more insane. And that's not a good idea. So, okay, so Black Tantra, do you want to talk more about it? We're good? Okay, so Black Tantra is the use of the sexual energy in losing it to create power. We talked about this. Black Tantra is what develops, the Kundabhafa. The Kundabhafa, which is the fire that descends and actually connects us to the earth. It's the connection that actually connects us to the infernos. Makes a person powerful, but in doing so, also links them to the inferno. You understand? Power, but at a great cost, yeah? And so a lot of these sort of spiritual schools teach this, and unfortunately, a lot of what, we were talking, Tanya was mentioning all this sort of stuff, and Brad was saying it's all normalized. Even Black Tantra is quite normalized nowadays. A lot of these sort of tantric practices, for instance, of like focusing on your desire while you're in the sexual act, this is normalized, when actually what this does is Black Tantra. It roots you to the earth. It doesn't actually give you the power to free yourself. It actually pulls you deeper in. And so that's Black Tantra. And a lot of this can lead to Black Tantra as well. A lot of these sort of obscure sexual acts. I don't want to go too massively into this because I just don't like talking about it. But it doesn't need to be talked about. It's just the reality, But all the other stuff too is all the things that aren't actually have anything to do with sex and sexuality. Remember, sex and sexuality is just a relationship between a man and a woman. And then the generative and regenerative power that they can use that sexual energy and sexuality for. But now you've got all this sort of stuff, where people are, pretending to be animals, and then these people are actually hating themselves just as being human. Do you know what I mean? Like, they don't even want to be human anymore. They want to be a dog. Not like, the kids dress up as dogs and have fun. These guys actually think they've become a full adult and they think they want to be a dog. It's like, what's going on? Something's wrong with you. Do you know what I mean? And then even some of the acts that they see as sexual aren't even sexual. These guys just getting beaten half to death or something, and somehow it produces a sexual sensation. This is all in here. Yeah. So what's happened is the person's they've crossed so many lines. And it's like like that lady there. I read an article once about a lady who she services the very rich people around Wall Street and all that sort of stuff, and as a mistress or something. But she said that pretty much nothing she does is actually even sexual with them. These are the guys who run society, and she said what she's doing wouldn't even be classed as they're not even getting undressed even for what they're doing. And yet somehow there's a sexual sensation, really weird things that I don't want to talk about. But it's like the same thing. It's like, so they're actually gaining a sexual sensation out of like smelling something or out of touching or licking something. And you're thinking to yourself like, what happened inside of you where that you can't even get the normal thing, like a normal sexual reaction between, you can't even get an arousal, you can't even feel a normal sexual connection now, even for the opposite sex, or even for your own sex, just for nothing now. You have to do something that isn't even sex anymore. Do you understand the problem? So this can go really far if you want to go that far. But for most people, as I said, it's just we start to twist. For a lot of people, it's this sort of thing. We just sort of, we just twist our sexual energy. So our sexual energy becomes twisted inside of ourselves. And every time we cross a line, it's like tying another knot. And eventually you got so many knots inside that you don't know how to untie it anymore, you know? So let's talk about untying that knot, because we all probably have that. You're all kind of looking at me like, what about those knots? All right, so let's go there. So we already talked about normal sexuality. This basically doesn't exist anymore, just to be clear. Yeah, this is like great-grandma and great-grandpa. Do you know what I mean? Who worked really hard materialistically in the fields and only really had sexual relationships to have kids, and sort of loved each other and had a sexuality together. They loved each other, you know, but they weren't really using that sexual energy more than just for having children, yeah? So, okay. So these two here, just before we move on, these here are only working with the physical aspect of the sexual energy, like the physical semen, or sexual energy in the woman, the sexual fluids, yeah? Now, what we're going to talk about in super-sexuality is working with the superior aspect, what we call the metallic soul. So super-sexuality is literally the absolute opposite of all this stuff we've just been talking about. The super-sexuality, so where this, you understand, the point here is degenerates. Do you understand? Do you know what a degenerative condition is? Like with your, like if a person has a degenerative condition with the brain, it means it just keeps getting worse until they're like gone. So like for instance, Alzheimer's starts off with you just sort of forgetting where your keys are, and then ends with you not even knowing who you are anymore, just kind of like in a room, you know? And so it degenerates. And that's what I'm trying to say about this sexuality. It's dangerous because it just keeps going. And by the time you realize how bad it is, it's just, you're already kind of right in there, you know what I mean? And so and it doesn't just degenerate us, it degenerates the whole of humanity. That's why if you look outside, speaking of sex and sexuality of the whole world, it's in the last, since the Aquarian age, yeah, things have really gone down. People try to sort of like, they try to fix it in movies. Do you know what I mean? They give you a movie and they give you a movie about the Tudors or a TV series about, you know, and they try to make it look like everybody was really sexually degenerated like 120, 200,000 years ago. But that's just not true. It's just not true. That people were not like now. This all started in the 50s and 60s, you know, and has just been going like this, wow, into the abyss really fast. And you must notice every 5 years it just goes like down one level. Every 5 years it's like that. It's like a falling down and like through the levels of the building. And every 5 years, and you're like, whoa. And each time you think it can't get worse, it's just like, you know what I mean? You're like, oh my God, you know, you see something on TikTok and you're like, oh. Yeah. You know, pray for humanity. Yeah. Sorry. I'll probably edit that one out. Anyway, so super-sexuality, that's what they're going to get me for. So super-sexuality, therefore, is actually the opposite. It's regenerative. So we're actually going to use that. We're going to use that sexual force, that sexual substance, in order to actually create, fix, and then continue. Just like when you regenerate like a piece of like wetlands or something, like you regenerate, you plant seeds, and then what happens with those seeds? They then drop more seeds, and then what happens? You get more seeds, and then more growing, and then more trees, and what happens? Yeah, it's more and more. And after you plant the first seeds, you get more naturally. That's regenerative. It just keeps getting better. It keeps moving, yeah, as long as we keep working with it. So this is a regenerative sexuality. In this one, we never lose the sexual fluid. Yeah, we never reach the orgasm. This is the proper chastity. In fact, when we're referring to the birth of Christ, and you'll see, and almost every other Superman or you know, great being, when they talk about in like what is it, the hero of 1,000 faces? You know, we talk about the great Christic messengers of humanity. They're almost always born of a virgin, And what this means is they're born of chastity, scientific chastity. Of course, they're born of a sperm and an ovum because there's no other way to be born, right? But they're born of a chaste relationship, not a degenerative one. Yeah. So, okay. So, what typifies or changes or what's different in super-sexuality is transmutation. So, what we're actually doing as in the sexual act, yeah, without reaching the orgasm, we are taking this raw substance that we have. This is what we have inside of ourselves. This is the raw sexual fluids that we have, physical sexual fluids that we have. And this is what we refer to in alchemy as raw mercury. And then we transmute that into mercury. And as we transmute that, the dry mercury, and I'll talk about arsenic sulfur in a minute, what we're removing is the impurities. So our substance that we have inside of ourselves, it's not just this life. Just to be crystal clear, this has been going on for ages. This isn't just now. This has been going on for lifetimes upon lifetimes upon lifetimes, right? Our sexual energy is actually completely black inside of us. Yeah, it has lost all of its all of its creative power that I was talking to you about in the beginning. All of this force that can create the internal bodies. Yeah, all of this has become lost, and so it's become raw and brute. Like I remember in Adelaide, where I sort of grew up, then the museum, right out front of the museum, they've got this giant meteorite, just a comet, big meteorite that hit the ground. So I think it was somewhere in Adelaide, and they brought us this giant hunk. It looks like iron, just this huge hunk of metal, and it's all just like like it's all just got all these bits kind of. It's just and it's spiky, and they've tried to smooth it out so kids can kind of play on it. You know what I mean? But it's just rough, and this is what our stone is like. In fact, this is how the Masons, the stone Freemasons used to refer to this. This was their great story. They talked about the raw, unchiseled stone and then the cubical stone, the perfect stone. What that's referring to is a sexual energy. It's the same thing as when the Christ says to Peter, I'll build the church upon you, you'll be my stone. He's talking about the sexual energy. And in fact, in our understanding, Peter is the sexual energy. He's related to Yesod. So this sexual energy inside of us, this sexual substance, needs to be transmuted. And what that means is we're actually taking one substance and converting it into another entirely different substance. I can't remember, I think I mentioned a few weeks ago, but what that means is we're taking the physical sexual fluid, transforming it into an energy, and then that energy becomes physical substance again as it regenerates the brain. And so that regeneration actually starts to regenerate the brain inside of us. And so that there's only one other thing in the world that can produce that same effect, which is the nuclear reactor. A nuclear reactor is the only thing that can bring into it the uranium, that then converts it into an energy, and then an entirely new substance of plutonium comes out. And so we have this same nuclear connection. When a man and a woman join sexually, they have that same creative power. So you can't do this just on your own. You must have a partner to be able to commit this thing. You can transmute your energy to a degree. So for instance, a single person can take their black energy and whiten it. So just through the process, for instance, of doing like the Hamsar practice that we've taught many times here in class, Hamsar, yeah, we can begin to clean those waters and make them white. In fact, you may have had that dream before. Have you guys ever had the dream of swimming in black water? No? Oh, just me. I guess I'm the degenerated one. Do you know what I mean? But I had it a lot, often swimming in black water or being around black water, and it really freaks us out. This is the sexual energy in those dreams. It's become black because it's full of what they call the dry mercury. It's full of the ego, yeah? And through many years, many lifetimes of fornication, what's happened is all of that dry mercury has kind of hardened up like this within us. And so when we try to transmute, when we try to move that sexual fluid, when we try to move it from the sexual center back up to the third eye, we try to actually, in that sexual act, move it, it doesn't move. Because all of this here is full of all these little dots of fornication that has slowly sort of gummed up the works inside of us. So through a lot of transmutation, we can then begin to move this to just normal mercury or transmuted mercury. This is a transmuted substance. This is Arche. This is the force or energy of which we can then go on to create the internal bodies of the being. This is also the same building block that can awaken the Kundalini. Yeah, the Kundalini the Kundalini is something really, really important for us as Gnostic people. Once the fire awakens, the whole process of the esoteric path opens up to us. Yeah, if you look here at this little picture here that we have of the three mountains, which we're going to talk about in 2 weeks. So next week is the practical aspect of the alchemy. Then we have this. The beginning door of the esoteric path, of the actual beginning of the proper internal path, starts with the awakening of the Kundalini. So the real proper, ignition or initiation into the mysteries is awakening the sexual fire. But before that can be done, we have to have transmuted this raw substance into a workable substance. Remove the metallic soul and have it prepared. In the same sense, if we're talking about in the process of awakening Kundalini, we have to have taken these black waters and whiten them through transmutation, through the process of their in the sexual act connected, transmuting, moving, doing certain mantras, through the process of love as well, because I'll talk a bit more about it in the next week, but the Kundalini moves in accordance with the merits of the heart, meaning the Kundalini awakens and moves because of love between the couple. It's actually the force of love that helps this process along. So when I talk about the importance of a spiritual and simultaneously spiritual and sexual union, that's what I'm talking about. So, excuse me. So, for the awakening of the fire, yeah, we go from white, and then if we continue transmuting, to yellow. And that process, yeah, from white to yellow, is beginning to remove the arsenic sulfur. The arsenic sulfur inside the practice of alchemy is the animal passions. The animal passions are always against you. It's normal, completely normal to have strong sexual sensations in the alchemy. That's the whole point, yeah? That's why everyone does all this, because they become completely identified with all the good feelings of the sex and then cross lots of lines. But in reality, we also have within ourselves these animal passions. And the animal passions are the opposite of the Kundalini. They're what try to actually drag us into losing the sexual fluid every time that we connect. Every time that we connect, they try to draw it out of us. And so once through the process of practicing alchemy and slowly dissolving these animal passions from ourselves and dissolving the ego, then we move that energy to yellow. And when it's yellow, that means that the sexual fluid, the sexual energy that we have, has reached a point, yeah, we've cleared the way, has reached a point where that Kundalini fire can awaken. So just so you are aware, because the Kundalini is something very important in Gnosis, this process takes years. Yeah, it can be done in 3 months for people who are completely prepared, but it can also take several years if the person doesn't practice correctly. And when this process begins, then that fire ignites. See, the Kundalini exists within you. Every single person has the Kundalini, even the children have the Kundalini. Everyone has the Kundalini inside themselves. It exists within the coccyx. The Kundalini is the power of the third Logos, yeah, the Holy Spirit within us. In fact, to go one step further, the force of the Holy Spirit is the sexual energy. When all these people say, you hear those guys like, is it General Buck Naked? Do you guys know General Buck Naked? He's a South African from like the 90s. He was a South African general. He used to go into battle because like South Africa's just been at war for like ever. Like you don't notice. Everyone's like, oh my God, there's a big war going on. It's like, if you ever go through Africa, they're just constantly fighting. They were fighting before the white man came anyway. But they've been fighting and fighting. And General Buck Naked goes in and him and his soldiers go to fight completely naked. completely naked. So the guy goes in like that. He's got an AK-47 and no clothes, and he runs in to fight the other guys. And he says the bullets can't hit me because the power of the Holy Spirit is with me. Yeah. And that's what he says. You know what I mean? He says, the power of the Holy Spirit is with me, so the bullets can't shoot me. My body is immune, you know, because I have the Holy Spirit. You know, and here he is like shooting people with a machine gun. You know what I mean? It's kind of a contradiction. But he's also not wrong. What he's actually using is black magic. And he's using the power of the Holy Spirit, his own sexual creative force, in a negative sense in order to protect his body. His belief is so intense, his power, his desire, so concentrated inside of himself that he uses that substance to protect his body. I believe that he's completely correct in what he's doing. I saw a guy do it once. I told you, I saw a guy faith heal a car. I knew a guy as a faith healer. He's quite a funny guy. He used to use the power of the Holy Spirit to heal. And he was a very, very emotional guy. He's a Leo. And I remember I remember he faith healed this car. It was amazing. I couldn't believe it. We were trying to start this car, like, and it wasn't starting. And everyone tried. The guy was looking under the engine. They tried everything. We tried to push start. It wouldn't start. And he came out of the kitchen. And this guy's like, he was the most lustful person ever. They created a specific thing at our, what's it called? At our, in the cafe, they made a specific rule that staff members weren't allowed to date because of how many messy situations he created with just sleeping with the women after drinking after work. He was phenomenal. But at the same time, he was a Christian, and he was absolutely convinced of his ability to faith heal. 100%, you know what I mean? And I remember once, and he literally put his hand, he said, everyone tried to fix the car, we couldn't fix it, and then he put his hand, he said, I call upon the power of the Holy Spirit, and he slapped the car like that, and it just started. I couldn't believe it, just like that. And he hit the car and it just started. It was so funny, you know? And the same thing. And he was so on a high after that he sucked a dent out of someone's car with his hand. He literally went up to another guy's car. This is the next week. And he goes, I have the power of the Holy Spirit. And he touched the thing and he went like, ah! And the dent came out of the car. And I remember there's a guy next to him. They used to argue all the time. There were the two types of Leo. One of them was, he was like, there's always two. He was like, Brocky, who's the guy with faith, he was sort of the chubby, self-compassionate, very emotional Leo, and I forget the other guy's name right now. He was the more sort of like clean-cut, very skinny, very intellectual, sort of arrogant style. Two different ones. And I remember he was just saying, oh no, the sun must have been on it at that exact time, and the heat just popped it out at that exact moment. And he's like, he's playing last week with the car. He goes, that could have been anything. You know, the car finally started. We've all been trying. Someone must have fixed it. The other guy just wouldn't admit it, and he's like, admit it. The power of the Holy Spirit is with me, you know? And it was amazing. But he's right. He's talking about sexual force. It's actually correct. The sexual force inside of you is the power of the Holy Spirit. Yeah, we're talking about the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. The Father is the highest part of the being, but we have no contact with. The Christ will come into us eventually through the process of the esoteric path if we get there. But the third logos is the Holy Spirit. That exists within your sexual fluid itself. It is the sexual fluid. And on top of that, the Divine Mother, which is the second part of the third logos, because it's twofold, the Interior Mother, or the Mother Mary, as they call her in Ireland, yeah, actually exists within your coccyx. She exists within the Kandan, I forget the term now. She exists within the last bone of the coccyx, in the coccygeal bone, curled 3.5 times around, asleep. And to ignite her, she must be drawn out with a lot of love, but also the energy must be prepared. Through the transmutation, with love and sublimation, I'll talk about that next week because it's getting late, but with love and sublimation, transmutation, with love and sublimation, we can then ignite that fire within us. And so once she ignites, she then goes through. And we've already sort of explained that process a bit in the other lectures about how in the C12, where she goes up through each of the bodies and then and as she goes up, she puts power into the chakras and awakens different faculties, etc., depending on the person. Someone else says she awakens everything. But from the people I've seen who've awakened so far, she awakens things in accordance with the ray of that person, in accordance with the power of that being already. So, and her process will eventually take us back to the Christ. The third logos will take us to the second logos. And then, as the Christ says, no one comes to the Father yet by me, he will then take us to the highest part of the being, to the Father. So, yeah, so this process here is actually about, therefore, cleaning out cleaning this sexual energy. And so once it reaches the power of that, just the transmuted mercury, it then can become the mercury plus sulfur, mercury plus fire, or as I've just been talking about, the sulfur, which is the Kundalini. There we go. Okay. So again, this process, everything I'm talking about here, can only be achieved in a relationship through the practice of regular sexual alchemy between a man and a woman, having both the positive and negative currents working together and in harmony. This process of transmutation can be created where with the power of the four elements, where the sexual waters are boiled and then they release as the air that goes up the spine and then redeposit into the brain, then down back into the heart, and then slowly also going through the higher bodies as well, between the vital, the astral, mental, causal. And this will actually awaken all of the, all of the latent possibilities of man. The latent possibilities of man and woman will be awakened through this process. Yeah, this is the sort of inner secret key. And of course, it must be accompanied with the death of the ego, and with working with the animal passions. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. So yeah. That's the explanation of the process of transmutation. And next week, I'll explain the practice itself in depth, because it requires a whole talk just to explain that. So this is a part 1 of 2 parts. Yes. Okay. A bit dramatic, sorry. Do you have any questions?
When you say the loss of fluids for both of the
Both.
women,
Man and woman. Not to reach the orgasm. To sit. We can go right up against it, but we don't lose it. We must retain the fluid. In fact, Samael's direct explanation he gives from the old alchemical text is he says to link the phallus and the uterus, or the penis and the vagina, to link sexually between man and woman, but without reaching the spasm. That's the terms that's used, without reaching the orgasm. So we actually stop at that point. It has many more benefits, which we can go into, like, for instance, in general, that sort of process also magnetizes the body, increases health. Very, very powerful for the body as well, in general. Yeah. That's all right. Yeah. I probably should have written it down, though. Yeah, so the process of super-sexuality and practicing alchemy itself, of course, therefore, we've already talked about it can create the internal bodies. As we said, awaken the Kundalini, which is very necessary. The bodies can't be created until the Kundalini is awake anyway, because it's the power of the Kundalini raising through the bodies that then opens up the astral and causal. It can regenerate the brain. I talked about this a little while ago. Yeah? This is how you fix your weed brain. Do you know what I mean? It's very common in Gnostic circles. Maybe just in the people I teach.
I've got a question.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, this lineage, Master Samael's lineage, is it the only lineage, sort of esoteric white tantra, if you like, that teaches the complete abstinence from release? Like the other ones, there's so much of, I'd almost go to the point of some of them, almost 99% of what you're explaining here are, some of them, they're almost sort of teaching the exact same thing, except
The most important thing
is the climax.
Yes.
But done within this framework. So is Master Samael the only one teaching this, or is there others? I know there's ones that teach abstinence. I know there's ones that teach, but not. I looked, and the only one I could find that teaches these the sexual alchemy process to this point, the only, from all the different traditions was after Samael. And I'm just wondering what sparked that.
He was given permission.
Okay.
Before that, you would have been killed for teaching this. This is the secret arcanum.
But was he practicing, did he come through the previous schools that taught all of this?
He learnt the very, very basic key of the alchemy from Arnoldo Cromhella, who was a Rosicrucian.
Right.
But Arnoldo Cromhella just very, very casually sort of mentioned, but it was, again, at that time, you weren't allowed to teach it publicly, always veiled. This has been the veiled teaching of it. That's why we use the term the alchemy. The alchemists, it had nothing to do with gold. They took all of this stuff is talking about creating the eternal bodies. Yeah, the bodies of gold and, the destroying the lead of the personality, etc. But you couldn't teach it publicly.
So the traditions that were practicing this, because as I said, there's quite a...
They're all in secret.
Yeah.
The proper ones, because there's there are some public institutions that are kind of close. I think you've already, that's what you're saying.
That were in France and they
Oneida?
wiped them all out.
Upstate New York as well, Oneida or something.
Oneida.
Like that. Oneida?
No, but all the
They're different. They're not from they don't come from a these are people who sort of figured it out a bit, but they don't have all this. So what they've got is they've learned to go into it specifically, like there's 3 uses of the sexual energy, right? There's physical, magnetic, and esoteric. Yeah, so physical is just you can have a baby, you know what I mean, or you just lose it, you know what I mean. Magnetic is when you start to be with someone, you do caresses, the stroking, and then as you join, you create a magnetic bond between the two of you. That's what I was saying. The problem is when we're always disconnecting. When you fornicate, you disconnect that bond. So you're always disconnecting, and eventually that magnetism just gets ruined, no matter how much love there is, And that's why you see eventually people in separate beds, etc., etc. Now, what a lot of these people, like I said, like I don't know how to pronounce. I think Oneida, the institute, they started to realize that they noticed the magnetism of sexual energy, right? So they see that magnetism is ruining relationships. The same thing with that lady who wrote the book Peace Between the Sheets or Cupid's Poison Arrow. Yeah. She began to realize that there was an issue. It's very similar like with the old Kareza teachings of the Hebraic. They've got a little bit more, tradition behind them there. It's a bit older. But again, most of these institutes, there's a similar thing with Mantak Chia, who's kind of Taoist, but all of these guys, all the same thing. They don't teach esoteric at all. So they understand the magnetic, but a lot of them sort of got there through other things. You know what I mean? They don't really same thing. Even a lot of Taoism has a lot more to do with healing the body through sexual practices and movements, but not awakening the inner power of man. Not about liberating yourself through the union of sexuality and spirituality. Very few people talk about having a relationship between the 3 highest parts of the being through sex. That, for instance, the love you feel for your partner will be the same love you feel for your own eternal feminine. And for a woman, it will be the same love she feels for her being. But it will slowly have to change inside. It's very, very hard to understand unless you've actually practiced alchemy. And so this is, so there's a lot of, but one of the biggest ones is almost all those schools will still recommend losing it for certain reasons. Do you know what I mean? They'll say, oh, you're pent up, you better have a quick loss, especially for men. Or they'll say women can lose it, but men can't. Do you know, like that Mantak Chia sort of does a lot of that. Mantak Chia is problematic because he uses the term orgasm very liberally. He says, oh, you can still have an orgasm but not lose the fluid. And it's complicated. It's very hard to know what he means. Is he actually talking about retaining your fluids using muscle spasm, muscle control while actually having an orgasm? Or is he talking about just the sexual feelings you have? And then he's using the word orgasm to mean pleasure. And I think that's what he is. I've read a lot of his books. But it's all very confusing. And on top of that, again, he's very lost in the sort of sensuality of it all, the feeling, and then the same thing when if he wants to have children, or if you're just feeling a bit pent up, I'll just lose it. You know what I mean? And you're not creating this power and this force. You're not completely changing your core. You understand what I mean? Yeah. Like as I'll teach you next week, but there is a process to have children in it this way. You can use it's called Kriya Shakti, the power of just releasing one sperm, like that, without the orgasm, in order to have a child. And so it can be done. So, in all honesty, I'm yet to find another completely straight public school. Public.
Yeah, sure.
I found things that are close, but nothing completely straight. It's always kind of a bit, you know? Yeah. Especially once we get into the practice. You know what I mean? But again, yeah. That's the question. Yeah. But he was given permission to teach it by the masters. And it's different now. In the Aquarian age, it's now public. In the Piscean age, it had to be in private. You're not allowed to talk about the Piscean age. That's why it was like always behind closed doors. That's what I mean, like the school of Kareza, which was in the Hebraic, that was sort of hidden. You weren't allowed to talk about that. Do you know what I mean? And the same thing in the Cathars and Templars were practicing alchemy. You weren't allowed to talk about that.
The Cathars.
Cathars, that's who you were talking about.
Yeah, because we went
French.
Yeah, so they had some of those.
They come part of our own lineage. Same thing.
Okay, because we went to the last remaining place before where they were wiped out to climb to the top of the castle where they were there. And
well, they definitely had the sexual teachings because the Pope had to wipe them out.
Yeah, and we had.
The Pope is a known infra-sexual.
It was very extreme the way that they, but I had remembrances when we went there, and these weird remembrances from that particular place. And I always wondered whether there was any connection between the Cathars and these particular traditions.
But that's the true teaching that gets passed along. That's the thing. Like the real, the heart of the teaching itself, the depth of the teaching is within the alchemy.
Yeah.
And that is the true teaching that is just whispered and slowly. That's what Madame Blavatsky got from the Tibetans and brought back.
Yeah.
She talked about everything else, but that wasn't the heart of the teaching. It was the alchemy that she started practicing with Kern Lolkov. Not necessarily this fantastic thing or the astral. The astral gets you. The astral's great, but it doesn't get you somewhere.
Yeah, because the wiping of the Cathars, you just can't get any clarity on the real motivation for the literal complete clearing of them.
Yeah.
Off the face.
Oh, they were completely genocidally wiped out.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, the Templars lasted a lot longer because they were stronger, and also because they were a little bit more politically intelligent. But they eventually wiped out too. But the thing is, what happens is usually that teaching can be lost as well. You know, like something like the Rosicrucians just lost it. Arnoldo Cromwell was the last person to have the true teachings of the alchemy in the Rosicrucian schools. Now they teach Black Tantra.
Yeah, it got moved.
But they literally teach straight up Black Tantra. If you go and stay in their schools, they'll tell you to do special rituals where you lose it. Yeah, where you all get together in the room and all this stuff. You do all this prayers, and then you get down. We don't do that here.
And Freemasonry.
Just to be clear, man, woman, your own thing, your own time. That's it. Yeah.
I was going to say Freemasonry had it as well in the old
Yes.
days too, and they've obviously lost it.
Yes.
As time has gone on as well.
Freemasonry went from being Freemasonry were part of the original the original lineage, yeah, and then they had it, then they lost it, and now they've even lost that, and now they're just a bunch of guys sitting around drinking beer. Yeah, they're just the Rotary Club, a different name. They're the same. They're not, because people are like, oh my gosh, the Masons made their black, they ruined the world. Nah, they're not even that anymore. They're just selling pies and like Kirk's lemonade at a thing, and you know what I mean? Like they're not. You know what I mean? They're nothing anymore. They're nothing, these guys, you know? So, which is a shame because they once had profound teachings, and then now they're just going. But that's the thing, the road to Or, yeah, AWE, the road to Or, the path to the back to the absolute is the alchemy, and that's the most hidden teaching ever. Even they tried to show it. Remember the Da Vinci Code? They showed it for like 2 seconds. Do you remember the Da Vinci Code? Do you remember this? Like they had that little moment. Oh, the Da Vinci Code. Oh, it's all the secrets of the Masons, all this stuff. But for like 2 seconds they show it. For 2 seconds they show the Master Mason there, and he's with a woman, and then they just quickly kind of cut out and don't show you anything else. Like for 1 second, it's like, did Dan Brown know? Probably not. But the one thing, did he know the depths of it? Very unlikely. Otherwise, why do you write a stupid book and try and make money? Think about it. If you had the pathway back to the absolute, why would you want money? You just wouldn't want it anymore.
Well, if you're aiming for people not to do that, you'd be perpetuating infra-sexuality on a mass global scale. You'd potentially also, by attacking, the spine itself and the entire process.
I have found the only way to create strong change is like this. Small groups.
Yeah.
One-on-one.
Often the way.
Yeah, but if you have like 300 people, how do I know you're practicing properly?
Yeah.
I have no idea. I'm not that I'm going to get into the intimacy of your life, you know what I mean? But how do I know that you actually understood what I said? You know, because this happens. It's happened. We've been at big retreats or something, and someone asked a question once, and it's like the guy at Rafa was running the retreat. He realized, like, oh my god, that person doesn't know what the alchemy is. They don't understand the alchemy. He thought the alchemy was, because you know nowadays the word alchemy is like a buzzword. I was driving down Bangalore, and there was a house, and it said like the alchemy of accounting or something. And it's funny because I had to give this lecture. Tonight, and so I looked at it. I was like, you know what I mean? I thought, because I know what the alchemy is.
The other Gnostic group of Wilson's Creek, they've got amazing marketing. They're like doing alchemic marriage celebrants and stuff. It's like 10 grand and pop.
Other Gnostic group. Oh, you're getting me. He's just trying to make me laugh. But it's the greatest. It's the greatest kept secret. And when we go into the practice of it, when we really talk about that, you're going to see just how simple it is. And it's something very intimate. Yeah, very simple, but very intimate. I'm going to teach you all the different ins and outs, but at the same time, it's just simple. It's actually just man and woman, that's it. Who are in love. That's it. It's actually love is the secret. And then so the alchemy is the secret, but the secret of the alchemy is love. You can't just go, well, I mean, you got the right things. You're a woman. Let's go back to the absolute. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. You have to be in love.
Hence the psychology, hence the relational dynamics, hence the self-observation, hence all the realities of the day-to-day. You're not practicing alchemy 24/7, particularly marriage.
No. You're lucky if you're practicing it twice a week.
But you need to, you kind of, if you're practicing it, you obviously that permeates the rest of the experience.
That's right. That's right. That is exactly right. But it's through that process. It's through that process that you will begin. You'll begin to walk the esoteric path. That's why the alchemy is so important. That's why when Samael originally started birth, death, and sacrifice, he put it at the top, because he knew without it, people wouldn't even start. And then the people just became an absolute mess. Some guy was practicing alchemy with like 7 different women, one for each day of the week or something. And then, people were just getting all these powers, practicing lots of alchemy. It's okay, you can lose a sexual energy, you create power, yeah? But you can also, practicing alchemy gives you a lot of force. People who practice, as I told you, the guy who runs our order in Australia, he's like 70-something. People come from all over the world to see him. He still practices. Yeah, he's still practicing alchemy with his wife, even to this day. So, he's regenerated, and you feel it in him. He may be older, but you feel his force, his power within his words, But it's not like a hard force. There's a gentleness, there's an honesty there that you want to be around him. You want to hear what he has to say. He's speaking from the being. But yeah, Samael had to move it, put death above birth, put the death of the ego at the top, because the people were becoming a little bit confused. They were just practicing lots of alchemy, getting lots of force, but not dying. That's right. Excuse me. Good? No more questions? Okay. Don't miss next week. Otherwise, this is all just intellectual stuff. All this stuff, yeah? The mystery of the golden blossom. This is the manual of the alchemy in Gnosis. Yeah, this is where the teachings of the alchemy are contained. I strongly suggest studying and reading it at some point when we're ready. But I will explain it all in the week following. Okay? Let's do a nice practice.